Thanks very much, Jeff. Good morning to everybody here. It's a real pleasure for me personally to be sat alongside these three gentlemen. As Jeff said there, we're going to discuss the past, the present and the future of the role of Sporting Director. So we'll start a little bit with the past, if that's all right. Because I'm sure for you guys, you've come into the role from different backgrounds and at different times. I'd be really interested to know, we'll start with you, Phil, when you came into Brentford back in 2015, what the role and the remit was for you at the time and how it's potentially changed since then.
When I came in, it was on the back of a desire, I think, of the owner to do something a little bit different. So my background's not from a traditional football background. I haven't worked in football before. And I partnered up with a guy called Rasmus Ankersen, who was the chairman at FC Midtjylland in Denmark, who had. So the remit very much was to, they made a statement at the time about what they wanted to do, and they specifically, explicitly said, we want to use some sort of statistical analysis, mathematical models. And our owner massively regretted that ever saying that, because now you never hear anything about Brentford without talking about data and analytics and all the rest of it. But that was part of it, but the part of it was to change and try and become something slightly different. I think we had a sporting director in the past who was very closely aligned with our manager. We wanted to break that distinction. We wanted the manager to be employed by the sporting director. So the remit was to bring in some new ideas. I'd worked with those ideas before, hence why I ended up getting involved, and to try and do something a little bit differently. And it took us a few years to get that going. We made a lot of mistakes along the way. But eventually, I think, Brentford is now known for something which was what we intended it to be.
How about for you, Dan? Obviously, your journey started a little bit earlier in football, well, a lot earlier actually, through coaching, and then first technical director role at West Brom in 2007. What did it look like at that point in time?
I thought you'd try and say because I'm old.
Not that, no, experience.
I was just trying to think. I think it was 2007, so 15, 16 years ago. Yeah. And I'd been the academy manager at West Brom, and the owner at the time, Jeremy Peace, who, again, similar to Matthew, I think, was a visionary, spent some time looking around Europe and wanted this role. I'll never forget it, use it quite a lot actually. He said, I want a suit that can wear a tracksuit and a tracksuit that can wear a suit. And he said that he couldn't have the conversations with the manager, with the agents, with the players, with the academy staff from, in his view, a credible position. So he wanted somebody who would have the football context, but also someone that could go in the boardroom and build strategy, as Dave was talking about there, put together budgets, long-term plans for the football club. So I said I'd give it a go for 6 months, but if I didn't like it, could have my old job as academy manager back, and been doing it ever since. And there was four parts at the time to it. So it was men's first team, medical, player recruitment and academy, and just sort of bringing those four components together and building a sort of a medium to long-term plan for West Bromwich Albion Football Club.
And as that evolved then over the years, going to Brighton and taking it beyond those four elements, was that an organic process? Was that something that you saw needed to happen?
Well, I think, yeah, so there's probably two bits to it. I think the game has changed so much over those 15 years. So there's now 9 or 10 departments, I think. So women's football, player loans department, data and analytics, analysis, football operations. So there's a lot more components to that than there was 15 years ago. Dave touched on it earlier about how the game's changing so quickly. And I think all four jobs have been really different. West Brom's different to my time at the FA, which is different to Brighton, which is different to Newcastle. So every club is still a football club, but they're all drastically different, and understanding the culture and what each club needs, seek first to understand, I think, and then adjust slightly some of the things that you believe in. But the role has pretty much fundamentally stayed the same, but just the game has changed and grown. And I think we had 3 full-time academy staff when I was at Cambridge United, and there's now 40, 50, 60 in Cat 1 Academy. So that's one of the areas where the game has just grown enormously.
And how about for you, Stuart? Obviously, when you first came into the role, you were young, relatively.
Still quite young.
Still young, relatively, again. I think most people in the room, if not everyone, will be pretty familiar with your story to becoming a sporting director at such a young age. But what did it look like for you, and what were the challenges when you first stepped into that role back in 2015, I think, as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, just before I was lucky because I went to Huddersfield, who'd had the model already. So I followed in from Ross Wilson, who most in the room would certainly know about. So that was good because I had 2 years there learning the role, which is already set up. So I obviously took it in a direction. I felt it needed to go in, but I wasn't coming in with a complete blank sheet of paper. Norwich was very different. Norwich went from a very traditional first team manager and chief exec model, and they decided as a board in 2017 that they wanted to go in a different direction, and they wanted to go down the head coach, sporting director, let's say managing director sort of route, and they had their reasons for that, and they approached me to come in and sort of map out what that looked like for them. And because the owners of Norwich are very, they have a saying, the one thing we know about football is we know nothing about football. So that was both helpful but also challenging as well, because then they, I think at that point, saw me as the guy who, well, there you go, then you just take it in the direction that it needs to go in, which was fantastic, but also, incredibly at times lonely and challenging. But I think, as Dan says, if I look at my time at Norwich, we're at Cat 1 Academy, we've completely rebuilt the training ground. We've, our scouting network was very domestic based when we arrived. We've now got 2 full-time people, for example, in South America. We didn't, data and innovation, Phil talks about that in 2015, that didn't exist. We've now got a team of 8 who run that. So it's changed massively, and I think it's been that constant sort of evolution of what's next, which is, both exciting, but also looking at Dave's presentation there about also actually where do you put your chips on what, and how do you determine actually what's going to give the best, bang for your buck, if you like. And I think that's been the challenge as it evolves so quickly, because society evolves incredibly quickly, the game evolves, everything, technology evolves, of actually, where do you put your chips?
Is that the biggest change for you then, Phil? Would you agree with that, that in many ways actually the role has become more complex rather than more defined? It was pretty vague for a lot of people in the beginning.
I think it's more well known or well understood what the role is. For me, in terms of being in Brentford, when I started, I think, for right or for wrong, I'm not quite sure this is right or not, but there was a general feeling that it was a thing that overseas clubs had and English clubs didn't really have. This is back in 2015. There wasn't so many examples of it, where now I think, certainly for me, it's not got more or less complex. It's got more complex being in the Premier League, there's more staff and all the rest of it, but the remit of the role's not really changed. I think it's a more understood job now. I think more clubs are like, right, we've got to have that role. That to me would, obviously Newcastle, I'm sure you guys, but I don't think I can think of a club really who don't have a sporting director now. Whereas when I started, 8-9 years ago, I think there was plenty of examples.
Yeah, especially the lower down the pyramid that you go, right, where arguably, Dan, they need that kind of strategy and direction, perhaps more with less resources.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously a big advocate for the job. I will be. We've been doing it for a number of years. It was really interesting when I first started at the FA. It was the one pillar that was no qualifications, so that you were a coach, you had a coaching pathway, a qualification pathway. So try to set up something similar for recruitment and some standardisation and professionalism, I guess, for qualifications and CPD, ending with a technical director's qualification, which a number of universities do now as well. And we pulled in to get into the room a number of people that we thought were doing the job within England. Stuart, you were there at the time and came in and said, okay, if we're going to write a qualification, what would it look like? What do we need to cover? And sort of got the game to write the qualification for the game. But what was really interesting was we had about 24, 25 people, I think, doing the role at the time that came in. I think there was 10 different titles: technical director, sporting technical director, director of football and operations, director of football, and probably 24 or 25 different role profiles. Every club does it slightly differently, I think, and some would have training ground, some would have recruitment, some would have academy, some would just be recruitment. There's no wrong or right, and I think the context for every club is slightly differently. But probably the thing that as you just touched on there, that's been brilliant is that you see so many clubs across the pyramid now, and we've got a couple in from across the pyramid that have got the role and bought into the role, and I think that's the way forward for the clubs here, and it's been a marked change.
In your experience now then, Stuart, having been to that back in the day and kind of an attempt at that point to lay out what's the criteria for a technical director, a sporting director, how much has that criteria changed like right now? If you could rewrite that, what would it look like?
Well, I think it depends on the club. I think it depends on the ownership model as well, and I think it depends on the people within that club. So I don't think there's anything wrong with having a sporting director model where if you've got a super experienced chief executive who has done that role for many years and been successful, if they take on the negotiations, I don't think it has to be an ego thing of I must do this, this and this, or the head coach must report to me, or I'm the only person who hires or fires. I think that depends on the organisation and the business that you're in and the people within that, most importantly, because there might be someone more skilled in the room to do that part of the job, which we would traditionally go, Sporting Director oversees recruitment. Well, maybe your head of recruitment's the best person to do that. So actually you should step back and let him or her do that part of the job and maybe marry it up, oversee it, whatever, but take the sort of the ego out of it. But I think in terms of a blank sheet of paper, it's having that ability to fundamentally drive the strategy of your sports part of the organisation. But then also it's that ability to marry in with the needs of the business. And if you take the club at Norwich, for example, with our model where we don't have an owner who puts money in. So my relationship has to be as strong, if not stronger, with our head of finance as it does with our head coach. Because to be honest, if we get the finance bit wrong, we go bust. Because we don't have somewhere who can just go, it's a £50 million check for the money you lost in COVID. We're going to have to sell Ben Godfrey, or we're going to have to sell this player or that player. So I think it depends on the organisation, but I think it's that person who can marry up the two, have empathy for all the moving parts within the organisation. I do think it's important that relationship with the head coach is a massive pillar of that, because as we all know within our organisations, we can have a fantastic plan and a great strategy, but if a key pillar doesn't buy into that, then that can have a detrimental effect to all of the other people who need to come on that journey. So I think you're kidding yourself if it's, we can let the head coach do his own thing, we'll continue the strategy there. I think in the end it goes wrong, and I learned a painful lesson through that myself over the role of psychology actually. But I think it's difficult to say blank sheet of paper start, because like I say, you've got to respect the owners, the staff within the business. They might have better skill sets to lead on that.
I'll just pick up on a point there. So it is right that this role is completely different for every different club. It'll fit the club, and it's kind of been a role that's kind of been sort of layered on top of existing structures. I think I was a little bit lucky in terms of we came in and we kind of just rewrote the rule book at our club from scratch with a blank sheet of paper. That was good. But I think in terms of what they were saying before, if you're in charge of putting a strategy in place, it's very much easier if you're in charge of everything. Like everything sort of, if you're overseeing everything, if you're somebody who oversees, say, you're the sporting director oversees the recruitment, but you don't oversee, you're not line managing the head coach. I don't know what it's like, because I've not done it, but I would imagine that's a little bit more difficult to join that strategy together and get that sort of connection and that kind of holistic view of everything, and doing it that way, I would imagine.
That's an interesting point, actually, and something else that Dave touched on and Stuart mentioned there, empathy, building relationships and the psychology of the job as well. In you guys' experience, has that been overlooked potentially in the past with the kind of the backgrounds traditionally that people come through into the sporting director role?
I probably wouldn't say generically a sweeping statement has been overlooked in the past. I think we've touched on probably the key thing so far is everyone's a bit different. Every club's different. Jeremy Peace is very different to Tony Bloom, who's very different to the new ownership structure at Newcastle. And I think the people that you've got either at the top of the organisation that are running the club and within the organisation, that's the key thing. I said it once before, but seek first to understand what's right for one particular business is not necessarily right for another business. Again, used this before. I read a book, The First 90 Days, and I've read it 3 times before each different role, each job gone into, and it's the same messages, is don't assume what worked there will work there, and don't assume what didn't work there won't work there as well. And it was a book about transitioning across businesses and CEOs moving within the same type of business but to a different organisation. Unless you understand the culture and the people within the new environment you're going into, I think it's I don't know if it's an impossible job, but it was a really, really difficult job. And I think that's the key part of understanding the personalities, the strengths, how the club's structured, what are the expectations? Are you expected to win? Are you expected to stay up? Are you expected to make a trading profit? Understand all those things first, and then the culture, the emotional relationships you have with the staff there, I think become a lot easier.
Can you give us, Dan, a bit of a case study example then in your recent experience moving from Brighton to Newcastle United, where it's a different ownership model, obviously, very different expectations, presumably from the owners and from the fans as well. Having been through that process so recently, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's a really similar thing, concept of landing in a new role that from the last three jobs because of reading this book. So I think first and foremost, to go in with an open mind and not assuming that everything's brilliant or everything's rubbish. We've all have a preconception of moving to a new organisation. What does it look like from the outside moving to Newcastle? What was my preconceptions of Newcastle? What was it like as a city, as a club, as an academy, as a scouting department? And go in there with an open mind. Try and build some relationships early without making any generalisations, and then empower the staff to come back. And again, Dave touched on it before, and Dave did this brilliantly, England, I have to say, in get people to tell you what they think they're good at. So we went through a process with each department and said, okay, go on then, you give us a SWOT. What do you think you're really, or what are your strengths, rather than weaknesses? What are the gaps? What are the opportunities? What are the threats? And get them to come up with where they think they're at. And people are really honest. And they'll come back with, yeah, we perhaps haven't done this so well, but we're really proud of this. And it perhaps gives you a good picture of where the club's at. Same process, but totally different results. Brighton was in a totally different situation that Newcastle were. Not better, not worse, just different.
One of the challenges, it seems, from the outside, chaps, is there's more, as there becomes more kind of definition around this role, people understand it a bit more, there's also more of a spotlight on it as well. And whilst the role is to provide long-term stability and structure, strategy for an organisation, there's also, I know, Stuart, you've had some negative experiences of being in the spotlight and in the firing line as well of fans, whereas in the past that was kind of, head coaches were taking a lot of the flak for short-term results. How much has that changed, do you think, over the years? What's it like now, and what do you think it's going to look like in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I brought a lot of that on myself, in fairness, which was also part of the strategy. So what people don't realise sometimes when you do the media, any time I've ever done media, I always do something at the end of the season. At Norwich, that's something expected as a job. It's not a choice, it's expected. And it's like, okay, how am I going to approach this? The negative reaction came when actually I came and protected the whole organisation. So what people want me to say at that point was, we need a new ownership. We can't compete now at this level. We can't compete with the money that these guys have got. We need to change the head coach. Everything's wrong. Everything's a disaster. What I actually did was came out and said, this is all me. This is all on me. I lead the strategy. The strategy's gone wrong. This is all on me. So what that enabled it to do was it took completely the pressure away from the head coach, away from the ownership, bang, all focus on me. So I brought it on myself, which part of that I regret, but a big part I don't, because, it's like at the end of last season, there was, a lot of abuse going around to me personally. And I can take it because where I live out in the sticks, my only interest is walking my dog, playing football with my son, whatever. I don't need to go in the city and be popular. I've been in Norwich probably 4 times in my life. I've lived there 7 years, so all that bit is irrelevant. It's not like it's changed my life at all. I still walk my dog in the middle of nowhere where I don't see anyone. But what it did do is it put the narrative in the direction that I wanted it to go. But I think what I am seeing more and more and more of is, every game and every football match now, it's almost like it's built up to a point of there's a winner, there's a loser. The loser, there's something drastically wrong. The winner, there's something drastically right. And I was watching with Brighton when they got battered a couple of weeks ago, I think, at Villa. And I'm listening to pundits after the game, well, they've been, found out and, it's always going to get caught out playing this way. And it's like, a week earlier, he's the best coach in the world ever. It's the best football club ever to be bought. Everyone has to do what Brighton are doing. If they don't, then, you should shut down. And then they have one bad day, which can happen as we all know in sport, you can lose, and it was like magnified. And I think the media has become so, I don't know, I don't read the papers, but I pretty much guarantee if you pick up all of them today, there'll be stuff about Man City losing 2 in a row. Pep lost his magic. Is he only good because of De Bruyne? You'll see just comment there because maybe it's an ex-player who's got to keep himself present by saying some crap. Whether it's a journalist who doesn't know, with the greatest respect. One thing I've learned with journalists, I know Neil Ashton well, who's obviously, at the top of his game, did that programme, a Sunday supplement for years. And I invited him in for a week, and at the end of the week he's gone, I didn't know that this is what happened at football clubs. It's like, well, no, of course you didn't. But it's easy to sit on the outside and go, he should do this, he should do that, she should do this, she should do that. And then you bring them into the environment and they see the work and they see the challenges and they understand, you know, at a club like Norwich, it's about, we're the only club in the county. So, and there's no other sport. So all the people do is care about Norwich City. You go up an hour up the road, you see Norwich shirts. You don't see Man United shirts and Chelsea shirts and Liverpool. It's a unique sort of place like that. 22,000 season ticket holders. But they expect to win. So we're in the Championship, they expect to win. We're in the Premier League, they expect to try and stay up. And it's like, so then you're trying to balance off the fact, though, that we have to be a trading club to survive. It's a real sort of tough balance. And unless you're in the inside and really understand the workings, you can't really have appreciation for that. And as we always say as well, we're in a league of 24 teams. The other 23 are trying to win as well. And that's all right. There's no sort of divine right. But I think, unfortunately, this media perception now and the supporter is, you're good or you're crap, aren't you? It's the same with politicians. You can't sit in the middle, can you? So Donald Trump, you've got to love him or hate him. You can't go, you know what, that policy was really good. I disagree with that one, but like, it's almost you've got to be one or the other. And I think that's what has definitely made the job more challenging from the outside, and it makes you spend more effort and time now trying to protect the people on the inside, your staff, your players, the families and people around them of, we've just read on some fan forum that Dotty says that we're shit. It's like, why are you reading what Dotty's saying? Who is Dotty? Do we even know who Dotty is? Oh, it's a 12-year-old Ipswich fan. Well, she's probably not going to be supportive of Norwich then, is she? And I find a lot of that time protecting that because, you know, we have a lot of young staff, as I'm sure Phil and Dan do as well, and, you know, they're brought up in this generation of reading this stuff and caring, whereas maybe, I don't want to say we're too old, but, you know, maybe we're not on Twitter always. That's not our world of caring what people say or even knowing how to use this stuff. I mean, TikTok, I still don't actually understand what it is. So they just put a video of what? Well, stuff. It's like, you know, why are we doing it? So I think it's, that's where it's become more challenging, but that isn't going to go away. So I think as leaders, and this is something I'm looking forward to a period of time out now of, right, how do I approach that differently? How do I be better at that? Because I've made so many mistakes. But also with them mistakes, I look back and think, actually, I've had zero support on how not to make them mistakes. And that's no one's fault. That's my fault for not either going to seek it from outside of the organisation or actually people within the organisation not knowing that, well, we don't know what to do, what to say.
Yeah, I might just come back to that in a second, but I was just interested to get you to, reflections on that.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. So you went out, obviously been, had a profile out there and said some things, as you said, to deflect away from the manager. It's interesting because I think in this country, the Sporting Director tends to be very much lower profile. I don't know about you, but I try and stay as way out of the media as possible, right? But then in other football cultures, maybe the Sporting Director might have a more high profile, be more available to the media to do interviews and so on and so forth. And what that kind of builds up is the attention on the head coach becomes absolutely huge, especially now. I mean, like, you know, if you turn on Sky Sports News and they're advertising next week's game, it'll have a picture of the two managers, big high-profile guy standing there with arms folded like that. It's, you know, it's like these are the two main guys. And actually, when you run a football club, you know that there are two important guys, of course, really important, but there's other important people as well. You know, they're all playing a really important role. So I sort of wrestle with the idea of, you know, how much should I get involved or be available or not be? Also bearing in mind that no one really cares what I say. Most people care about what Thomas Frank says, right? But then when you have situations like the Ivan Toney case, when his betting ban comes up, Thomas doesn't know anything about that really in terms of, you know, the technicalities, what you can say, what you can't say, the legal implications of it. But he's the one who has to answer all the questions. So how much do I spend my time saying, look, you need to say this, this, and this, don't say this, this, and this, versus actually, you know, am I the person really to be speaking about these matters, and does anyone really care? So, or does I care about what I think? So, how much to say or not to say in public is you know, that's a difficult balance sometimes, and it's also about trying to make sure that Thomas hasn't lumped with all matters, all topics, and all questions about representing the club in its entirety when he's the only one available weekly to speak.
How about you, Dan? And especially in a club where expectations are changing quite drastically in quite a short space of time, similar to Brentford, I guess. Really.
Yeah, I think it's a requirement of the role. I think any senior role within a football club, there's a public facing part to it, whether you're the chief exec, sporting director, as Phil says, the manager is the one that has to do a weekly, at least, press conference. They say, I think it's quite nice for them sometimes to have a different voice on different things, because they get asked about everything, don't they? And, you know, Eddie, for example, on human rights issues in Saudi Arabia, for example, which got absolutely nothing to do with his job. So I think there's part of that as a senior executive. I also think, and both Stuart and Phil have touched on this, the wider world don't understand the job. So they think it's just about signing players. That's effectively what they think a sporting director, technical director, whatever the title may be. And so it gives an opportunity at the times to, when you do a bit of media, is basically sort of beat the drum on knowing it's a bit more than that. It's not just signing players. There's wider things from the club, whether that's academy, whether it's loans, whether it's the women's team, whatever it might be. But there's actually a wider remit for part of the role.
Do you think, well, you said there's a lack of understanding widely about the role. Do you think there's a lack of understanding still within football and within football ownership about the role?
I think that's changed a lot. I think there definitely was 10, 15 years ago. I remember there was one manager said, director of football, what do they do? You know, do they stand there and direct football? It was, you know, at the time. But the job's been a lot more established in Europe. I mean, I think you're probably talking about Germany, when the sporting director takes the press conference, don't they, and sit on the bench and are more high profile than the head coaches. I wouldn't be suggesting that anyway, but here. But I think because of the fact that we've been doing it as a country now for sort of 15 years or so, there's qualifications, there's a bit more acceptance, I think, that it's part of running a football club, and as well as looking at some brilliantly run European countries and clubs and how they've gone about it over the years and the consistency and continuity they've had, is you know, people have started to understand better what the role is. Mm.
So as we look towards the future of the role then, and I'm going to come to you on this one, Phil, as something of an anomaly within the role, having come from the background that you did, statistics and data outside of football, and touching on what Dave said about diversity, cognitive diversity. Whilst we have established that there's no set way to get into this role, do you see a future where more people do come into it from outside of the game, from outside of coaching and from within football clubs?
I get asked a lot. How do you become a sporting director? How do you get into it, and how do you start? I think it's. I mean, the way I got into it was a complete freak. I mean, it was just like random, basically. Mm. So I can't say to people, yeah, if you just hope you get lucky, fingers crossed, that's your plan. Yeah. It doesn't really work like that. So they say, well, how do you get into it? Like, how do you start? And you have to start somewhere lower down and progress your way up. That's pretty much how you have to do it. So you either have to start in recruitment or analysis or in academy football or whatever and work your way up. So do I see people who are kind of able to have a career in one field and then move in? I think that's quite hard, because those people would have to then probably step down and work their way up again through the field. But definitely, I would say that there's a lot of people who will, outside of football, who would have a lot to offer inside, and it's just finding that pathway in. Maybe the right thing is that you advertise for a sporting director role, and lots of people apply from lots of different industries and backgrounds and all the rest of it, and you pick from one of them because they've got the skill set. But I think I think that would be. I'm not sure that I just can't see that happening right now, and maybe some point in the future, maybe it would be. But I think certainly doing the sporting director courses and things is a way of demonstrating at least the interest in it and the desire to get qualified and to pick up skills and experiences. But yeah, football's such a interesting and strange environment in many ways, and it was a huge learning curve for me in the first couple of years to kind of get to know what it was all about and how to do it.
Is there anything specific that you can remember, Phil, about that journey where perhaps you contributed something that somebody from within football or that was already in the club might not have seen or thought of?
I mean, yeah, many cases, yeah, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I'm sure there must have been things that I pointed out and said. I think what I did is brought in just maybe a different perspective, different point of view, having worked in things for many years, which I think there'd been Matthew, our owner, had sort of wanted to take some ideas that he felt passionate about, some thoughts, some ideas Tony will be the same with what you were doing, and bring it into the football club. And I think if you try and do that from outside and just sort of, from his experience was just tell people that's what they should be doing from inside, I think it's quite hard from inside to then understand, well, exactly what does he mean? But since I understood it and I knew it, I was able to go in there and hopefully spend more time just sort of guiding people on saying, look, if we look at it this way, or we do this, or you take, how do you measure that? How are you looking at that? You're telling me that, but can we measure it? Can we look at it differently? People say to me, I think we're good at set pieces. Brentford's a big thing for, I think we're good at set pieces. Go on, and how are we good at set pieces? How are we good? By what metric are we good? How are you measuring it? How good are Newcastle? How good are Norwich? So I think trying to just encourage that way of thinking. When we develop players, they say, well, how do we improve this player? Well, I think he needs to improve in A, B, and C. Okay, well, tell me what do we need? What level do you need to get to be an elite Premier League player? What's the level? What's the performance level? And how are you going to train that? How are you going to get down on the grass and actually train it? And what are you going to measure to tell me that player's made that leap to this elite level? Not just looking at the game and saying he's playing well, looks like a good player. What does elite look like? These sort of things, I think, are the ways I can sort of contribute and not tell people how to do their jobs, just provoke thought, I think.
And again, it just goes to show how effective Dave's talk was, because we keep coming back to it, but it's that notion of what does success like, how do you measure that, and also how do you check yourself against different metrics that Phil touched on there, Dan. Is that fair comment? And if so, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, it is. Just to touch a little bit on the previous question about the route into Sporting Director, and what's wonderful about this job, there isn't one. There's no set path. You need that qualification, you need that experience. The three of us are a case in point, I think. And also the diversity of thinking from different sports and different organisations. So UK sports, for example, you can be a performance director in judo, and then the next month you're in rowing. And they move their performance directors around from sport to sport because the principles of leadership and high performance are the same. And football has been really insular in the past, I think, and only ever seemed to recruit from within football, but thankfully that's changed quite a lot recently over the last few years, and people have thought about recruiting people from different industries, from different sports, from different organisations, because there's plenty for them to offer. Back to the measurement, we've got 12 minutes and 44 seconds left. I don't think I can answer that one in that period of time. Again, where data and analytics has been able to get us more recently, and it will go more advanced every month, every year, it's been able to measure the majority of things, whether that's your team technical metrics, whether that's physical metrics, whether that's individual player metrics, how players coming into the system from a recruitment or through the academy compared to the players that you've got. There's some wonderful things to do that. But I also wouldn't lose sight of some of the things that are a little bit more difficult to measure, such as culture, identity, team cohesion, where a player would fit in your particular group coming into a particular coach or environment, because you can't just automatically pick up human beings from one environment and put them into another one and expect the same results. And I think that's the sort of health warning, I guess, if you're just doing it purely on data. Just an opinion.
Having had a chance to think about it, yes. So I appointed a performance director 18 months ago who was from a predominantly rugby background, Ben Ryan. He was actually the head coach of Fiji when they won the Olympic gold in 2016, I think. And he's a Brentford fan as well. And he's like a god in Fiji. He's on the coins and everything. He's a well-known guy over there. But yes, so now I've had a chance to think about it a little bit. Yes, I appointed him, and I was specifically looking for somebody who might have worked in football, but specifically had a big experience outside of football.
Yep.
Just because I thought, what can that person bring in? Maybe he can be the sporting director one day. But like I said, he's come in at a senior level. Maybe he'll step up one day.
Tying a few of those things together then, Stuart, with the change that's going on now at Norwich City, Ben Knapper's coming in to take your place there. How much involvement did you have in that process? How much can you help him with his transition and help him, I guess, learn from the mistakes that you said you've made, especially when it comes to personal development and checking yourself?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of playing a part in the process, so I handed my notice in on the 29th of March, and I had a year sort of in my contract that I had to give, and we agreed it, it was myself with the ownership group to go, right, okay, how do we want this to look out over the next sort of 12 months. Because anyone who knows me, incredibly loyal to the people that I work with and work for. So I'm like, listen, I'm not going to stitch you up. Another job comes, I won't take it. No problem. If I'm here till the 29th of March, I'll work every day as if it's my last. Or I can walk out of your house today and not come back. So it was agreed on, they wanted me to be part of that process. We then had to work out how much of part of that process, because I didn't feel it was right that I should pick my successor. I don't think that's my job. I can recommend, I can give opinion as much as or as little as they want, but I didn't think it was my job to go get him, because they as an organisation have got to decide now which direction they want to take this. So I recommended a few people. They then used an outside recruitment firm where they put some of them people within that process, and that recruitment put that. But what we did do with the outside recruitment firm, what I was passionate about is, because I still don't think some of these firms understand actually what the job is. So it's like, oh, let's just go and get someone who's head of recruitment at X club and let's put him up. I said, no, come spend a week at the club. Come and shadow me, interview all of my staff, be around the environment, have a feel for the culture. And it's only a week, so they're not going to get a massive sense, but they'll get a sense of, okay, this is what this person, this is a hole which needs to be filled from this person. It's not just a job for someone who's never managed a person or a recruitment person or someone who wants to sit in the background. This club's a little bit different for that. So they then went through the process, and I came in then at the end when the board had decided, right, these are the final two. Would I be part of a discussion where it was more of a technical sort of type of interview and some sort of scenario stuff? Obviously, I knew the two people anyway and probably had a decent opinion prior to that interview. And then now it's on about, like you say, the onboarding process of this person. I think it's super important for Ben that he's given the freedom to get in and do his job quickly, and that I don't sit there as a shadow. So, you know, he starts the 27th of November. I've said to him, listen, mate, I'll be around for that first week for some key introductions. I said, and then you'll just see me slowly disappear out the way. I said, I'll be on the end of the phone till the 31st of March. So for you, for the owners, the head coach, any other staff, I live 10 minutes from the training ground. So if you want to come and see me, come round to my house. But I won't be going back into that training ground, because I think it's important at that point. Because we have to remember, you know, I'm sure Dan would have had this probably at West Brom, maybe at the FA. You'd have it now for Brentford. You know, I've been there 7 years. So every member of staff I've either kept, promoted, every player I've either signed, given a new contract to. So there's naturally a huge, you know, and I'm very present as a sporting director, so I'm at the training ground every day. Good, bad, or indifferent, I'm there. So you become a big part. You know, I will know our ground staff as well as I know our first team playing staff. I'll know our under 9 players and parents as much as I know our first team players and parents. Because you have 7 years of that's your life. That's what you do. So it's important that I get out the way and let Ben then take it in the direction he wants to do. And all I've said to him is, and I think it's the only thing I can say to him is, when you ask me a question, I'll give you an honest answer. You might not like it, but I'll give you an honest answer. And I have got no problem talking about what I am good at and what I'm bad at. You know, I'm not the guy who, I wasn't good at that because of this, and this. No excuses. I messed up there. My opinion is, don't go down that road. Don't get involved in that part of the job, because there'll be parts of the job, anyone who's done this role, I'm sure it's the same for you guys, that there's parts that people want to get you involved in, which takes up so much of your time and energy and doesn't actually help what you're there to do. And then you're the one getting called the C word by a load of fans. It's like, if you know that the last week I've actually spent doing something which is actually really, really unimportant, you know, and that's where I've made some mistakes, and all I can do is give him my opinion on that. Ultimately, he needs to decide himself, because he'll have his own unique way of wanting to lead, and he needs to take it in the direction that he wants to take it in and needs to take it in. All I can be there as a support, but I'd be there as Dan is. You know, Dan is someone, for me, we've never worked together, but if I've got something, I'll ring him up and go, have you come across this? Can you help me on this? What would you do in this scenario? I'm sure it's the same for Phil and Dan. There's people that you ring and get. I'll be there for Ben in 10 years if he wants it. If he doesn't want it, that's completely cool. But you know, what is most important is the football club has been there 123 years. It needs to be there for the next 123 years. The community needs it. It's a community asset, and you know, his job now is to continue growing that and making sure that, you know, when he leaves in 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is, it's in a better place than it is today. And that was my job 7 years ago. Can I make it in a better place than 7 years ago?
Good stuff, lovely. All right, well, we'll be putting Stuart's phone number up on a big screen in a minute if anyone wants to give him a call later. In the meantime, we've just got time for a couple of questions from the Slido. So we'll go with this one from Rowan. When reviewing how successful your strategy approach has been for something, are you more outcome or process oriented? And how much of a role does data play in this? We don't have much time, chaps, so anybody want to put their hand up for that one?
Yeah.
Yours, Phil, that one.
Yeah.
Go on, Phil.
All over that.
So we have a strategy, and I put a strategy in place for a period. The current one's in for 3 years, but we have an annual kind of set of targets within that. So we review it annually. The trick with strategies is setting targets annually that not everyone hits. So people who come in new to the club sort of go, well, if we meet, you know, if you give me these targets for the strategy, if I miss them, do I get sacked? That's the question I got about 3 weeks ago. No, I expect some people to fail, because otherwise they're too easy. So can't be too hard, can't be too easy. That's just sort of balancing that and getting that right. I'm definitely more process-oriented. So some of those strategy points will be putting processes in place, which obviously is not something you can necessarily kind of come up with a one-number metric of yes, we did it or not. How much of the role does data play? Yeah, so some of our strategy targets annually will definitely be measured by data, 100%. And like I said, sometimes we'll hit them and sometimes we'll miss them. And the trick and the skill of, I think, my job is to be able to judge when is it being missed because we weren't good enough, and when's it being missed because we/I set the target just too high.
Okay, lovely. Shall we go to Dan for the next one then? What are some of the creative ways you've used to get buy-in on strategy?
I think if you can get people empowered and excited about your vision, so if they feel that and can see how they can play their part in helping the club or the organisation achieve their vision and get that clarity, I think you get people then excited and inspired about how they can do that. And if then you can empower them to then say, well, go on then, how can your department, how can you help Newcastle be a top 6 club, the FA unite the game, inspire the nation, Brighton be a top 10 Premier League club? What part can you play? You tell me, and you get you and your team excited about the role that you can play in doing that. I think that's probably the best way of that I've found that really getting buy-in into a strategy, get people empowered in it.
Build a culture of intrinsic motivation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think you've touched on this a fair bit already, Stuart, actually, how you deal with the pressure that comes with the job. There's another one for Phil, actually. As a current Cat 3 academy, how's your view changed over the past years from not having an academy to the current state and the plans going forward?
So currently we're Cat 4, we Cat 3 or 2 next year. So just a bit of background if anyone doesn't know, we closed our academy in 2016. Yeah. So that's straight into your point, Dave, about where you place your chips. We wanted to get promoted. We had bottom 3 revenues in the championship, very limited funds. Where do you put your money? Developing 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds? Or do you want to put it in everything to get promoted? So that's fundamentally why we did it. And obviously we then had a B team which has produced players which had contributed to our promotion. So, you know, in our playoff final, we had B team products playing in that game. And they came in just older, much more ready and nearer to that opportunity to get promoted. So nothing fundamentally against academy football per se, just it was about placing chips. It was a great metaphor for that. So now we're Cat 4, we have to be Cat 3 next year, or Cat 2. Current state, it's been changed a little bit. I think when we closed our academy, we were able to recruit players in the B team, especially from Scandinavia. We had a big presence over there. We had a footprint in Denmark, the owner owned Midtjylland as well in Denmark. So I brought through Mads Røslev. He's playing our team right now. Mads Beck Sorensen, Marcus Forss, a few others. All the Marcus Forss at West Brom. Brexit changed it massively because it cut off that supply line, or it did, at least short term. I think there's possibilities we can do some things now with this kind of new rules that are coming in place, but fundamentally that changed everything. So we probably would have gone and opened an academy, plus we had a lot more chips in the Premier League to place on different things. So going back into youth development, I think is important. We're in a great catchment area, and we can definitely develop players again. So that's a little bit of a quick snapshot as to why we did it, where we are now, and the Premier League told us we had to open an academy as well. So that kind of that seals the deal. You're opening one. Premier League have told us we have to do it.
I guess that's the result of getting a top gambler in the right place when you've got a table full of chips, right, and know where to put the right ones.
Well, in theory, it's a controversial. Well, I mean, the decision to do it was largely mine. It was actually like the B team was kind of my idea. I gave it to a guy called Rob Rowan to kind of implement it. He did an absolutely amazing job. And Rob passed away 5 years ago now. And that's one of the great things I think, hopefully, about working for Matthew is I don't have to worry too much about getting lots of buy-in from lots of different people. I report to him, so it's like, I think we should do this. Do you agree? Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Done. Obviously, then the actual closing of the academy is a little less straightforward, as I found out to my cost and maybe upset a few people along the way. But hey ho,
Great stuff. Gentlemen, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and insights. Ladies and gents, mainly gents, that's another topic that we might come back to another time. Phil Giles, Dan Ashworth and Stuart Webber.
Yeah.